Hello and welcome to Thank You Half Hour. My name is Tom Christopher Warren. I'm, of course, your host. And today's guest, I'm going to try not to fangirl, but I'm literally making no promises. My guest today is an entrepreneur extraordinaire, is a mentor of other entrepreneurs and women going into producing. She is herself a multiple TONY Award-winning Broadway producer, public speaker, and this is the part where I geek out completely, executive director and co-founder of the Museum of Broadway. Please welcome Julie Boardman. Julie, thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of
Quite an
course.
introduction. Very sweet.
No, listen, I really do make no promises not to fangirl. I went through the museum myself about a year and a half ago. Every detail, every moment, every bit of that immersive experience, my friends, if you have not been to the Museum of Broadway, it is for us. It is for theater lovers, theater practitioners. It is for visitors to the city who just want to learn more about not only the history of the American theater, but also America itself, right? They kind of parallel each other. So I have to start. How did you are a former performer. You are an incredible Broadway producer, currently represented by what? You have Cabaret at the Kit Kat Klub right now, right? You have Romeo and Juliet is yours. What else do you have currently?
I'm a co-producer on Sunset Boulevard.
Sunset Boulevard, maybe you've heard of it. Yeah, just three massive hits that you're
Yeah.
just juggling.
Well, I guess.
So how does a Broadway producer come up with the idea to coalesce everything, synthesize everything into an experience because museum is like the shorthand version of what that immersive experience is. It's so much more than a museum. How did you come up with it?
Well, I mean, I guess if we go back in time, right? I
Yeah.
grew up a huge fan of musical theater, and then later in life, like, grew to love plays. If I'm being really honest.
Same.
But yeah, I saw my neighbor in a production of Annie, and I was like, "Mom, I want to do that." And so then I did like the next show that children's theater did, which was The Sound of Music, and I played a goat in The Lonely Goat Herd. And that was the beginning of my performing career. But then I like performed every chance I could in like
Yeah.
children's theater and regional theater, and was the narrator and Joseph and whatever all the parts are that people do, right?
Amazing. And
So
you're a California girl, yeah?
Japan when I was little and all the things. Yeah, Southern California. And so yeah, when I was 10, I was like, I just want to go to New York for my birthday. And my parents luckily were able to make that happen. So we came and I saw Broadway shows, and I was like, I have to live here. And I just sort of knew that was like my path. I moved here after college, kind of on a different path because you never know how life takes you.
Yeah.
But I was like working at a record label. So it was like kind of different, but sort of related, I guess. And yeah, so I, performed, and then I ended up, I guess it's like a long story, but I started an event staffing agency at one point when I was performing, because I had fallen into being a brand ambassador for Evian, and then I
Oh,
was like, oh
cool.
yeah, and so I was like a promotional model
Uh-huh.
for everyone at the US Open and Fashion Week and the Food and Wine Festival.
Oh, wow.
And my friend was like, well, if you start a company, because I was like, oh, my friends are amazing, you should hire them. And he was like, well, start a company and then I'll hire you and you can staff it. And I was like, okay. And so I started a company in 2008, I think. And yeah, it was just sort of like off to the races from there. And I worked with all these big major brands, Nike, Coca-Cola, HBO, like, I don't know,
Yeah,
a ton.
major brands, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the experiential agencies that I worked with was my friend from college, Diane Nicoletti, who is
Yeah.
my partner at the museum. And, we met in college, and she ended up starting this agency right around the same time as I started my staffing agency. So she would produce the events. She worked mostly in like film and TV, doing
Okay.
fan activations for like Marvel movies and some
Mm.
Disney properties and a bunch of things. And then she became on retainer for Game of Thrones because they had so many seasons, and it would go to DVD, and then they would do
Yeah.
fan activations all over the country. And so then I would staff them for her with basically out of work Broadway and film actors. And then I would like on-site manage, and we would work together in that way. And so, yeah, along the way, you know, I was like, I don't really want to be running a staffing agency for the rest of my life. That's not my like calling. And so I was like, how do I get back to the theater? And my friend was like, well, it sounds like you might want to be a producer. And he is like, well, if you want to be a producer, you have to raise money. So why don't you go try? And if you can, you'll know. And if you can't, you'll know. And I was like, okay. And so I tried and I raised some money for his tour of Dream Girls. And
The one
I
that
went to,
started at the Apollo?
yeah,
Oh,
not,
yeah.
I did the non-equity version the next year.
Got it.
So it toured the country and then it went to Japan and it made money. And my friend was like, this is awesome. What's next? And um, so I ended up doing Peter and the Starcatcher and brought in a couple more investors. And then it just kind of grew. And then American in Paris was the first show that I was a co-producer on Broadway. And I like was friends with the producer through like life in New York, I
Yeah.
guess. Um, and he's like, don't let me down, but you got to raise a lot of money. And I was like, I won't. And so anyways, I was involved from the reading workshop kind of time, I guess, on. And I just loved that show so much. And I
Oh,
still
it was
do. It's
stunning.
so beautiful.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I'm like doing all this co-producing and getting to know all these people in the Broadway industry and yeah, like making my way slowly but surely, making friends. And I joined the Broadway League and all sorts of things. And yeah, but I was still doing all the staffing. So I'm kind of like living two lives. And Diane and I were, we were friends catching up. And it was right around the time when like Museum of Ice Cream, that sprinkle pool photo
Yes.
was everything people had
Yep.
like posted. And then, Color Factory was just kind of starting to be a thing. And this like immersive, like experiential quote unquote museum is coming to life and becoming a thing. So we were brainstorming. I was like, yeah, there's not a Broadway museum. And she was like, that's crazy. And I was like, what if we made it, but did it in the way of like what we know how to do and like the fan activation,
Yeah.
basically. Like we created a fan experience for Broadway called the Museum of Broadway. And it actually has like all the history and everything. So it is akin to the idea of, like the Museum of Ice Cream, I guess, right? And that it's like fun and colorful and you walk through and it comes to life around you, but it's rooted in the actual history of Broadway. The development of the art form of the musical is definitely like a key piece of it because it's a very unique American art form
Yeah.
that people often forget. So, we just found it took us a little while. We were, having cocktails and brainstorming. And
Sure.
then after a while, we were like, you know, time had passed and we were like, wait, this should exist. Like, this is, because we didn't take ourselves like fully seriously at the
Yeah.
very beginning. And we were just like having fun and we were like, oh, what if it had this and what if it had that? And, and then we kind of started to figure out this idea that is really rooted, the timeline in the Museum of Broadway is rooted around this idea that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. So had people not pioneered and broken ground and taken risks, we'd never have the art we have today.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it through that lens, then certain shows like really jump to the forefront, people and groundbreaking moments. And both of us are, technically millennials. And so I think we come at it with a certain viewpoint. One of our curators, Ben West, who curated the timelines, he's also a millennial. So we had like a different vantage point, I guess,
Yeah.
than had always existed. And we had like a story we wanted to tell about, how groundbreaking the art form actually really is, and why theater is so relevant today. And so as you journey the timeline, you're seeing these shows, and it's not every show because obviously it's city real
400
estate
years
and
of history. Yeah.
yeah. So we only have a certain amount of, we have 26,000 square feet and it's across 3 floors of exhibits. And, people are like, oh, I had no idea it'd be so big when they walk in the front door. Because you walk in through the gift shop, but in and out, I guess.
Smart.
But yeah, no, so we like, figured out this way to tell the story. And, yeah, so it's around that idea. But then also, if people are really paying attention, because you can walk through it and like I don't know, we say like an average of 90 minutes, but some people spend like all day there.
Oh, I spent all
So
day. Yeah.
yeah,
I took an,
because
I, I had Andrew Lip is a very dear friend, and he said, "Oh, I have a piece of music in this room," and I had, you're seeing personal
yeah,
connections in each room that you're scouring for because there's so much detail to take in. And you calling it a story is perfect because it is so linear and it is very narrative in how you sort of experience from place to place within the museum itself and floor to floor, and it celebrates everyone, the actor, the producer, the stage manager, the designers, the creatives. It's mind-blowing.
oh, thank you. Yeah, some people who work like in the community are like, oh, it's just for tourists. And I'm like,
Mm-mm,
no, it's
mm-mm.
not. It's like if you work in it, it actually like I think helps remind you why you love what you do,
Mhm.
which sometimes, you know, it's tough to work in Broadway. Sometimes you need that little pick me up and a reminder of like, you're part of something bigger than just what you're doing at that moment. So, anyways, that's part of my
Yeah.
gig. But yeah, so as you're walking the timeline, this other idea is also there. It's a Yasmina Reza quote, and it says, "Theater is a mirror, a sharp reflection of society." And so if you take that in also with the idea that we stand on everyone's shoulders, then you're seeing like what was produced at that time is actually a reflection of what was going on in the world and in the
Right.
country. So, when you get to Cabaret, for instance, on the timeline, um, at that exact moment that it was produced was in the middle of the civil rights, right?
Yeah.
And so there's like a really epic story of how Prince, during rehearsals, showing the cast the photos, and they all thought it was, of like Berlin, pre-Nazi Germany and
Yep.
like, the 1930s, but it was actually photos from, I think it was Alabama or Arkansas. Like it
Right.
was literally happening in this country at that exact moment. And they were like, their minds were blown. And, that's probably the staying power of that show is because
Mhm.
sadly, always relevant. I
Yeah.
think maybe John Kander said like, I hope for a time when it's no longer relevant, but
Right.
sadly, just humans, I guess it has always remained relevant. And today, more than ever, I would say.
Oh, I
So,
think we're experiencing that now as we all go to see Wicked. You're seeing more and more people understand the metaphor that certainly wasn't intended to be a Trump metaphor because Wicked's been around, the novel's been around predating Trump as who we know him. But you see the movie now and it's impossible not to, connect the dots and
yeah,
understand that it is currently a mirror of what's happening in our world. And musical
yeah.
theater has always been a reflection of what's going on, right? I think you have the Black Crook represented, right, in the museum. And yeah, since then you see, it's just remarkable to parallel the American timeline politically, socially, economically with the art. In our case, musical theater, but all art has reflected what's going on in the country. And now you
Yeah.
finally synthesize that in a building, and it's so friggin' cool. I have to ask, how do you start to go, okay, there's 300 years of history, and not every show has enough cultural relevance to have a spot in our 20,000 square feet. How do you weed through that, or who do you find to go out there and go, okay, these are the resources we have. We have these artifacts. We have this much square footage. We have this narrative and sort of storyboard that we want to follow. It
Mhm.
seems like I mean, I guess that's what you do. You're a producer. You take an idea and you make it happen. But how do you do that from the ground up?
Yeah, it was quite a journey because we started brainstorming it probably in 2017, I think, and we opened in 2022. Um, Obviously, COVID was in the middle of that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, as I said, like Diana and I had like, we were like, oh, this should exist. And then we started like putting together obviously it wasn't the two of us who made the whole thing. We had
Sure.
like a wonderful team of people. And so David Rockwell is a friend and he was an early person who came on board. He designed the area where you go backstage. We
Uh-huh.
call it a Broadway show. So I guess for people who are listening who may not have been, the museum was broken into a couple parts. So you go through this kind of backstage experience to get up to the third floor via the stairs, or you can take the elevator. Then we have the playbill room, which is what we call it, but it's everything that's currently running on Broadway that day. So if you come to New York and you don't know what you want to see, you can actually read like the copy and scan a QR
So
code and
smart.
Yeah, you can buy a ticket to the show right then and there.
What?
Um, yeah, and I think, a lot of people know like the big hits that have been around for a long time, Wicked, Hamilton, Lion King, like
Sure.
these huge shows, but they don't necessarily know all of the offerings of Broadway on any given day. So it's kind of a wonderful, in my opinion, I guess I'm very biased, but resource for that when someone's coming to town. Or, if you do live here, it's already hard to keep up on because things open and close all the time. So we always have that up to date. Then you walk through a door that says, let's start at the very beginning. You watch a 4-minute video that's projection mapped onto a wall that goes through the history of the theaters in New York City, the actual buildings and how they started downtown, where people settled and migrated north, and how Times Square became what it is today.
Yep.
Then you start walking the timeline we were just talking about from 1732 with the first documented performance all the way through to present day. You have timeline walls highlighting people, places, groundbreaking shows.
Yeah.
Moments that happened that pushed barriers, all sorts. There's a lot of, I can see how someone could spend all day because there's so many little things to take in. But you could also just like fly through and take a couple of photos and,
Sure.
Still take it in. But yeah, and then you have exhibits that are designed by, we looked pretty globally, I guess, as we were putting together who the designers of each of the exhibits would be. There's artists from, kind of all over. When lives in London, Liz West, who did a chorus line, that mirrored installation where, you look one way, you see yourself and you turn and you become the chorus line and you can like dance and,
Genius.
So she's in England and, just trying to think of all the different artists in hair. That artist, she lives in Australia. So there's like, Broadway's a big brand that's, all over. It's a global brand.
Sure.
So we want to make sure that everyone kind of had their own way in, if you will. And then we also have Broadway scenic designers who design different exhibits. Like Bunny Christie did the company exhibit. Anna Luisos did the West Side Story exhibit where you can like dance along and learn the choreography. There's so many people. David Corrins did the Hamilton exhibit, of course. Derek McLean did we call it the jukebox room, but it's Ain't Misbehaving that helped to pave the way for other jukebox and catalog musicals to follow. So like we looked within the community, but also like for artists, we have an exhibit along the timeline. Everything's dedicated to like a show or mostly musicals because it's an exhibit and you want to hear music at the same time. For the exhibits, but we do have one room that is dedicated to the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah.
Everyone we lost. So Debbie Millman created the art on the walls, and yesterday was just World AIDS Day.
It was.
So collaborated on a post for that. And then Hot Tea, who does like ribbon installations all over the world. He did the red ribbon installation, and then the Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS quilt is right there too. So
it's breathtaking.
Wonderful. That room, it's quiet. Everyone has like music playing, and you walk in there and it's meant to hit you so that you remember everything would have looked really different had that not happened. So
sure.
Anyways, it's a lot of fun, but then there's also like really serious moments, and we donate a portion of all ticket sales to Broadway Cares too. So
remarkable. And you worked in conjunction with BCFA to build the museum, right? And I think the Lincoln Center Museum for the Performing Arts, right? Did you work in?
Yeah, we worked. The head of the theater department helped a lot. They have an incredible resource.
It's extraordinary, yeah.
Yeah, sadly, like everything at Toft is behind obviously closed doors, and we couldn't show it in the museum, but we can help direct people towards, other places and resources. But yeah, we worked with a lot of different libraries and collections, and also like, so the final permanent exhibit is that Making of a Broadway Show that David Rockwell designed that I explained. And in that room, we worked directly with all of the different authors who are represented in the dramatist room, where the whole room is decoupaged with people's work.
Yeah.
I'm calling Lynn Nottage and Susan Laurie Parks and Matthew Lopez and Paula Vogel and all of these, people. And I was able to lean on a lot of relationships that I had made over the years, so and friends. So, um, but we did clear everything with each person to make sure, that they're okay with having, the piano is like ragtime and In the Heights is right
Right.
behind that. There's a lot of detail to take in. In that room, we also custom upholstered the furniture with the handwritten pages.
So gorgeous.
I was never signed for, it's like The Sound of You see like Do Re Mi and The Hills Are Alive and how those songs like came to be. So
I mean, even if you have no knowledge of Broadway, just visually alone, the space is breathtaking. But for a theater lover or practitioner, you look at all of those details and it's mind blowing. You bring up Paula Vogel and Matthew Lopez. Inheritance and Indecent are two of yours, right? You produced.
yeah, well, I was a co-producer, so I
Yeah.
helped, raise money for both of them.
Yeah.
Um,
Two of the most remarkable nights of theater. Well, I guess three, if you call it The Inheritance. And really probably seven because I saw Indecent, I think, 5 times. But just the most
that
remarkable.
was such
I mean, I've never had experiences like that in a theater. Indecent, it was the first time that I'm making up the size of the house, but 1,800 people collectively shared a moment of like collective grief. 1,800 people gasped at the same time. And I thought quietly, right? But every single one of us shared the same sort of expression of emotion based on that singular piece of theater. It was mind blowing.
Yeah, I saw it at the Vineyard and was like, I have to be
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's like the power of theater, I think. And there's nothing kind of like it. You sit in this dark room with all these strangers around you, and you're able to share in a
Mm-hmm.
moment, like you said, or you're laughing, you're crying, and I think it helps create empathy and,
Yeah.
just hopefully you walk out of a show and you think about the world a little bit differently, maybe.
That's the goal, right? I mean, that's hopefully the goal of all art. My first tattoo is an Aristophanes quote, says, "Let each man exercise the art he knows." And it's become one of my sort of North Stars that whatever your art is, if it's teaching fourth grade, if it's ballet, if it's raising your child, dentistry, whatever, you have a responsibility to do it in a way that, maybe leaves the world a little bit better than how we found it. That's the goal. That's the hope. But you have there's a, I forget, I saw an interview or something where you quote Tom Schumacher, who I think I want to get him on the show too. He's remarkable. But he told you to pick when you were producing or you wanted to produce, he said, pick something that looks like it's going to tank and you'll learn the most from it. That's true? Without naming names, did you do that?
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
I had the fortune of meeting a friend of his. You never know how life is going to unfold. At the time, I was running that staffing company, but it was just starting to get going. So I was also cocktail waitressing, like as
Sure.
wear a lot of hats
Yep.
always in New York City. And I met a friend of his, and so he connected us. And then at that time, I was still like acting a bit too.
Yep.
And so he's like, "When you're done with that, come back." And then I came back, and then yeah, he's so generous with his time, obviously, to like meet with someone he
Oh my God.
definitely didn't know at all,
Right.
and he's wonderful human. Yeah, so we had a great conversation, and that was, he's like, you'll learn a lot, by observing, basically. And so I did do that. I interned on a show, and then I tried to intern on like what I thought would be like a hit also. So you never know. There's like a saying, I guess a lot of people in the Broadway world say you never know anyone who says that they know like what's gonna hit or work or not, doesn't actually know either.
Yeah.
So because there's so many factors you can never know because you don't know what's happening in the world at the time. It takes so long to develop something. Um, so you don't, yeah, who knows what the world's going to look like when, play developing now is ready to be shown, you never know.
But your brain has to work in a certain way. I mean, I read that you had 5 internships in college, right? That you just cast your
You
net.
like read a lot about me.
I love learning about people. But like the idea, I taught theater for many years and was in charge of placing students in internships. And the idea of someone casting their net so wide to learn so much, to have their fingers in so many different pots, and just for the sake of obviously networking and building relationships, but also learning from so many different factions. And then you're telling me you interned, post conversation with Schumacher. You just seem to have a hunger for learning and for creating and for taking an idea and building on it in such a way that you make it a reality. And I think that the mind of a producer just has to work a little differently than those of us who interpret others' ideas, right? And one isn't better or worse than the other, but I can't wrap my head around you just having an idea and going, this should be a thing. Yeah, let's make it a thing. And it's a thing. Because how many people had come up?
You made it sound so easy. It was really hard along the way.
I'm sure. But how many people had the idea to have a museum collecting Broadway history and memories and artifacts, and it didn't work? There had to have been people who tried it before you.
Yeah. And I obviously, when we first started, I didn't really know, but then I started having a lot of conversations about it and learned that others had, tried to make a Broadway museum before. For various reasons, it didn't get off the ground.
Yeah.
So maybe we're right place, right time, lots of, determination.
I was going to say right place, right time sounds humble, very, very humble. And I'm sure there's a component of right place, right time, but the determination is, do you come from a line of like entrepreneurs?
I do. Yeah.
Do you really? That makes sense.
Yeah, both of my parents are entrepreneurs. My mom was like a computer programmer at a time when only guys did that,
Wow.
So, I had a little of that like built into me. My grandfather is an inventor, like aerospace. So,
Casual aerospace.
I mean, it's kind of cool. It sounds like a big brag, but I guess I'll say it since here we are.
It sounds like a pretty great brag.
Yeah, he invented the pulse rocket. It's like the thruster that made it possible to land on the moon.
What?
And I didn't believe it growing up because I was like, that's crazy. But then I actually like Googled and found the patent and all the things. It's true.
Okay, that's bonkers to me.
Yeah. So anyway, so he was like an inventor. So I guess I have whatever all those things are that I grew up with, and then just in theater. But I didn't think I'd ever do anything like this ever in my life. This was definitely not on my path. It just kind of happened to come along. And I think there are a lot of conversations too around that same time in the Broadway League of like, why aren't millennials coming to theater?
Yeah.
It's always like, why are the younger generations not coming, and how do we get them to come? And so, part of it is I think there's a bit of threshold fear for Broadway a little bit too, because like if you've never been to Broadway, it can probably feel pretty intimidating to like go inside that theater, and then there's like the usher, but you're not supposed to talk to the first one if you have a ticket close. Like there's a lot of things that no one explains to you until you've done it the first time, I guess. And so if we as the museum can help bridge that gap a little bit for someone who's never been to a show ever, and they can walk inside and learn a little bit about the history and see some things that they probably have like cultural references to, or maybe they've only seen like one show,
Sure.
Same kind of thing. And then you go backstage and you learn how shows are made, and you see that it takes so many years and so many people who are like part of it. I don't know, it like humanizes it a little bit too. So, so if we can do that to help, we have this mission, I guess, if you will, that to educate, entertain, and inspire. So if we do those things, then we're hopefully doing
you
what
do
we
those things.
should be
Every
doing.
box is ticked. Yeah. And you have rotating exhibits as well. Like, am I wrong? I just went to the website this morning. Do you have a Disney on Broadway exhibit right now?
We do.
Near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. So it's 30 years of Disney on Broadway. And so we have a bunch of different costumes on display, and you get the stories, and there's some interactive like photo moments that are really fun. You can make a wish with the lamp and hold Simba up on Pride Rock, and it's so cute. So we tried to program everything in the museum with a bit of that, so you get the history, knowledge, for people who like think they know everything about Broadway. There are some stories that hopefully they didn't necessarily know, like Oklahoma was originally called Away We Go,
Yeah.
like things like that, right? That most people probably didn't know.
Right.
But then, then it's combined with the experiential. So, in that Oklahoma exhibit where that like fun fact, and you're seeing like, the handwritten, lyric sketches on the wall, you're also walking through a cornfield and you're hearing the
Yeah.
music that's coming to life around you. So even if you don't take in like Away We Go and that doesn't mean anything to you, you can still be like, oh, I walked through this exhibit and it, you can take out of it what you want, I guess.
Oh, yeah. For those who don't identify as museum goers typically, right, who find a museum experience sort of dry, perhaps, this is not that in the least. You must experience this because it's so experiential and immersive. Yeah, I'm biased because I happen to like the source material quite a bit, but it really is for the layperson, the muggle who doesn't make their life in the theater. It's still thrilling.
Yeah. Well, and I think also two things. One, we have a free app so people can just download it and then it translates into a bunch of different languages. So I think the visual storytelling of, that Oklahoma cornfield barn, like for someone who doesn't speak English, that's really impactful too. Um, and the other piece of it, I think, is that, Broadway is a bit nostalgic, right? For people, they might remember listening to, some of the music with their grandparents on like, vinyl, like back in the day. Everyone has kind of different connections, or maybe they didn't have that experience at all. But they've, heard, name a song. There's so many from back in the day that became jazz standards. Maybe they just kind of know some of those songs. So, yeah, we tried our best to kind of program to a lot of different groups of people and all ages, really.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, extraordinary. What's next for you? What are you excited about coming up?
Yeah, well, the museum we're always, working on new artifacts to display, new special exhibits. We do a lot of free programming. We've got a couple of Disney workshops that we've just announced today.
Cool.
We're going to be extending the exhibit through January 12th, and then we've got 3 different workshops. And have photos with Santa, of course,
I love it.
around the holidays. Just a bunch of like book signings and things like we always have going on. So that can certainly keep me very busy. I'm also still co-producing on shows. So right now, as you mentioned, I'm on Cabaret, Sunset Boulevard, and Romeo and Juliet. In the spring, I'm involved in Smash and Buena Vista Social Club. Further down the line, I'm involved in Sinatra, the musical. So like there's just
Matt
a
Doyle,
lot. Yeah. Oh, he's incredible.
Of course he is.
There's so many things, and I'm developing some work as well. So there's just a lot to see. But it's fun.
Just 6 Broadway shows, the Museum of Broadway, and developing other things. Yeah, just that and living a life somehow. That's really pretty remarkable. You make it sound easy.
Yeah, I paint for fun. So
do you?
Mm-hmm.
What medium?
Acrylic.
Cool. When on earth do you have time to paint? Is that your sort of Zen therapy?
Yeah, it was like when I stopped performing, this became like my creative outlet, I guess. So
speaking of your performing, Raj sends his love. Robert Anthony Jones.
Oh yeah, we did a show together once upon a time.
He said, I just saw him an hour ago. I wrote a Christmas Carol that's being produced here and at the Schubert, where Away We Go premiered in New Haven. And Raj is our Fezziwig. He's brilliant. And we just had a 10 a.m. matinee that everyone rallied magnificently for. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your clearly very, very busy schedule to just chat with me and let me pick your brain and fangirl a little bit, because I really am the mentorship that you do for other people who want to go into producing and into entrepreneurship. Follow Julie Boardman on Insta, on the socials, because really it's remarkable. And the more of you that we have out there encouraging young people to follow that path, particularly young women to follow that path, that this is a possibility, and not only a possibility, but it's so achievable with that determination. Thank you for doing what you do.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you for asking me to be here. I appreciate it. It's very sweet.
Absolutely my pleasure. And that is our episode. Thank you to Julie, and thank you, Half Hour.
Boxland Media. Think big.